What is up? Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. I am your host, Ryan Weisse, and we are still in rookie season. It is time to actually get back into rookie drafts. We've been doing some startups lately, but the fact of the matter is this. The real NFL draft is coming, and so are your rookie drafts. People want to know where these players are going to go. Let's get into it. Good morning and welcome to Mock It Like It's Hot, Club Fantasy's weekly mock draft show. As I mentioned, I am your host, Ryan Weisse. With me, as always, Austin Amandolia. Austin, how are you doing on this lovely, lovely Saturday morning?
I'm doing okay. If you know me, you know I'm a baseball fan. And Atlanta Braves ace pitcher Spencer Strider's getting an MRI today for his elbow. So that's very sad to me. So just bear with me in these challenging times.
But I mean, the good news is the Mets suck already, so the Braves still have a good chance in the NL East.
That's true. The NL East is hot garbage outside of Atlanta, pretty much. And Phillies, they're good. They're a little hit or miss.
There you go. And guys, we are talking rookies today. And when I think of rookies, I think back to when I first started on Twitter. And one of the people who helped me get really familiar with rookies through his threads that are now articles is Pope's FFH. Jeremy, the people are already happy to see you. We got Gator in the chat saying the Pope is here. Welcome. Let everybody know who you are, where they can find your work. I like to do that early on in the show so people can go and look for you before they hear you talk.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate the enthusiasm, Gator. It's I don't think I'm that popular. It's nice to know that people actually pay attention to stuff I do, so that's a plus, But yeah, you can find me on X, like you had said, Ryan, at Popes FFH, and then all of my written work is at FTN Fantasy. You can head on over there. You mentioned the article threads; those are pretty cool. Those are free, so if you want to just get an idea of the rookies, you don't even have to subscribe to FTN. You can just go to my X account, go to the highlights tab, and I usually put all of them in there. You can scroll through there and go ahead and click on those.
There you go. So that's awesome.
Any of that stuff. And bear with me, Austin, instead of the baseball, I'm getting over a cold. As you can hear, I'm slightly nasally. So, I'm going to do my best. But if I get nasally long talking, that's why. I
have a sad guy and a sick guy. It's going to be a fun morning. Guys, as I mentioned, it is going to be a rookie draft today. And let's go ahead and get that up on the board somewhere in here. Boom. So I went 10 teams just because 10 is a nice, easy number with 5 picks per person, meaning that there's going to be 50 picks in this draft. That's a good number for what you're probably going to see in most rookie drafts. And we'll talk more about guys who might be priority free agents later on. I'm going to go ahead and get the draft started so that we can start talking. So the draft is now started. You guys do not have the first couple of picks, so we'll have a little bit of time to talk here. And so, guys, the first thing I wanted to talk about is actually not related to the draft at all. And first, I want to give everybody a rundown of how this show is going to work. If you've never tuned into Mock It Like It's Hot before, we do not rate or review every team. That is not the point of the show. The show is about learning through mocking. We want to help you guys look for trends, try out strategies, and basically just talk about the interesting picks as they happen. At the end of the show, Austin and Jeremy will recap their drafts, and I might pick an oops of the draft, all in good fun, looking for a mistake you guys have made. Usually in rookie drafts, I don't know enough to look for a mistake, but maybe there will be. But guys, before we get into the actual show, I want to talk a little bit about Dynasty. I had a user or a listener just ask me a question before we came live, and I wanted to run it by you guys because I answered it one way, but I don't pretend to be the expert. How important in Superflex is landing a third quarterback? And going into rookie drafts, we may see a lot of people struggle with that same question. How important is it having that third quarterback in Superflex? So this person, my buddy Dave, has Anthony Richardson and Lamar Jackson. So he's not bad at quarterback, but he wants a third one, especially due to injuries. And with rushing quarterbacks, that could be a problem. He has some depth at wide receiver. Puka Nacua, Chris Olave, Jackson Smith and Jigba, Amari Cooper, Chris Godwin, and Marvin Mims. So a long list of wide receivers. He is being offered Will Levis, the starting quarterback for the Tennessee Titans, straight up for JSN, though they may be willing to throw another piece in. He will not accept Cooper and Godwin. He already tried. He is pretty set on accepting JSN for Levis, but they may be willing to throw another piece in. Jeremy is a young wide receiver, a first-round pick, second year in the league. I know quarterbacks are important in Superflex, but I'm not all that sold on Will Levis. JSN versus Will Levis in a Superflex. How are you looking at that, Jeremy?
I think to start it off is the main question of how important is a third quarterback. I'd argue it's not as important as it gets valued. Obviously, a third quarterback is great. The quarterbacks do tend to score more points depending on your scoring format, all the way into, the 20th quarterback averages 15, 17 points. But Will Levis last year was only around 12 per game. So you're not talking about a lot of production out of him. Obviously, you're expecting growth if you make this trade. JSN was actually under that. He was hovering around 10 points, I think, in half PPR, maybe even 8 on a weekly basis. But again, you're expecting some production growth there as well from what is a very touted second-year player coming out of Ohio State. So for me, the value is a little bit too rich to give up JSN for Will Levis. I would probably just stay the course because Superflex, that's the nice thing about Superflex, and I think it gets overvalued. Like, it's not 2 quarterback. You don't have to start 2 quarterbacks. You can plug in if you're super deep at receiver. And that week, I forgot who'd you say you had. Anthony Richardson is one of them. Say
Anthony
he's
Richardson's Lamar Jackson.
Yeah. So say Anthony Richardson's on bye, you just plug in JSN. Or if it sounds like you've already got Cooper Kupp, Chris Godwin, like you're deep at receiver, like just roll it out. I mean, there's plenty of leagues that I've played and made it deep into the playoffs with 1 quarterback in Superflex leagues. You don't need to have that. You want to really still just concentrate on pure value and not give up that young prospect for a quarterback who has way more question marks than I'd say the receiver does personally. I don't hate Will Levis by any means, but I still prefer JSN long term when it comes to Dynasty in that category. Like you said, if they're willing to give something else in there, maybe. But I'm still leaning towards JSN.
There you go. You got about 10 seconds on the clock.
Yeah, I got you. I was watching it.
Oh, my man knows what's up. All right, I'm not warning you for the rest of the show. But Austin, having done as many shows with you as I can, I feel like you're about to say a lot of the same stuff Jeremy just said. Because I had a feeling that was going to be your type of answer, is to not so much treat Superflex like it has to be 2 QB.
Yeah, I think Jeremy hit the nail on the head there. And the only thing that I would add as a way to think about this is basically what you're trading is 1, maybe 2 games of Will Levis for a season of Jackson Smith and Jigba in your flex spot. Like that's the assessment you're having here. You're not starting Will Levis over Lamar Jackson or Anthony Richardson unless one of them is hurt. And if one of them's hurt, your season's probably over anyways, right? So might as well keep JSN, who has a way higher ceiling, it's way more likely to be the volume hog as he starts to age and develop, and some of the older receivers in that room start to dwindle a little bit over time, like Tyler Lockett's getting on up there in age, and JSN can fit right into that role, whereas Will Levis, he's still a dart throw. We know what JSN is. Will Levis, TBD.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Guys, I'm going to talk a couple things about the draft because we have some interesting things happening, and this may piss off some of my drafters, but I'm going to tell you why it's not that big of a deal. So first and foremost, I'm going to talk about who we have with us. We have Toilets to Titles, Big Game James, BroCal44, my buddy Lou Hall, who I did the Scott Fishbowl draft live with last year, Rotonaut, Jeremy is picking from the 1-6, Odwar is at the 1-7, Mike Sicoli is at the 1-8, Gator Raiders, who has continued his streak, drafted with us, I think, every draft at the 1-9, Austin picking from the 1-10. You may notice 3 of our people already went auto. For a mock draft, I could not care less about that as long as you're dealing with decent ADP, because these are going to get picked very similarly to what you're going to see in a real rookie draft. And another thing you're missing from rookie drafts is trades. So do not freak out about the auto picks as long as you're dealing with decent ADP. There's a question of, are we actually dealing with decent ADP with Sleeper? But that's a problem for an entirely different day. So we have those drafters with us. But like I said, don't freak out about the auto drafts. And I wasn't sure which question I wanted to lead with, but the draft went exactly how I wanted it to go, Jeremy. Marvin Harrison 1, Caleb Williams 2. In a super flex, I feel like I've been making this joke for 3 consecutive years now. In a super flex, I was always told it's quarterback no matter what. It's quarterback no matter what. It's quarterback no matter what. Clearly, the ADP is not playing that out. And honestly, over the last 3 years, we have found a reason to not draft a quarterback with the first pick of the draft. There's always been that guy, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, like these guys that we wanted instead of a quarterback. And this year, it appears to be Marvin Harrison. Obviously, team need is going to dictate, but if you're not struggling at either position, Jeremy, should we be considering Marvin Harrison over Caleb Williams in a super flex?
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad strategy. I mean, when you're really building a dynasty roster, if you're 1-1, there's 2 situations. One, it's like Austin mentioned, your star quarterback got injured. You lost him for half the season. Your roster's solid. Other than that, you just weren't able to put it together. Injuries could be that way, and maybe you have a really good roster. Maybe you have Josh Allen, Anthony Richardson, Lamar Jackson. There's probably dynasty rosters out there like that. So, yes, Caleb Williams is great. Yes, his trade value would go up. But can you trade in your league? You have to take that into account. If your team in league doesn't really trade a lot, having a piece that you want to leverage and trade with isn't going to work. People will tell you that as a strategy, but that's where you have to know your own league. And that's where I'm fine with taking Marvin Harrison. I think that him and Caleb Williams are kind of their own tier. Both seem really kind of like that quote unquote generational prospect. And if you want to go the receiver, that's fine. You're going to get a long shelf like that. We've seen what Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase have done. Even in regular dynasty startup or redraft, there's people taking Jefferson and Chase before the quarterbacks at times in Superflex leagues in just redraft. So the wide receiver position is definitely heavily valued, especially in a PPR or a half PPR. Harrison's likely going to have that wherever he goes. He's going to get a high volume target share. So I'm in on it. I like it. I would not fault anybody if they decided to go Williams over Harrison, though, but I like both directions.
Austin, I guess just continue on that thought process. Again, it's just funny to me that since I've been playing Dynasty, Superflex has always been hammer the quarterback, but we've found consecutive reasons for 3 years now not to hammer the quarterback.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Like the 2021 draft class is the one that sticks out in my mind on this. Like, that was the year to get your guy. You had Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Zach Wilson. Oh, we thought these guys were going to be so good. Trey Lance goes third overall, and then Mac Jones was the best rookie of them all that year.
Jamie in the chat points out QBs have a high bust rate.
They do. They're one of the hardest positions to scout for the NFL. Like NFL teams, like that is what they're spending most of their energy doing because it is such a challenge. Also, the situation matters so much. And so if a team isn't landing in a good or if a quarterback isn't landing in a good spot, it might not work out. Bryce Young is a great example of this. I think he's better than what he showed last year, but the Panthers were awful and he didn't have a chance to succeed in his first year. Marvin Harrison, I don't think it matters where he goes. He's going to be an elite receiver no matter what. Malik Neighbors, I think he's going to be great no matter where he goes. So I can see an easy argument for taking either of them over Caleb Williams, as much as I love Caleb Williams.
Yeah, I think it's fair. And I mean, Austin, we've made the joke for years, and it's not a joke. I created this show to make myself better. And I find myself in a similar situation. Honestly, if you take the last two situations and combine them, it's a situation I'm in right now. I have, my goodness, why am I blanking on names? Jordan Love, Will Levis, Baker Mayfield, and then I drafted Kenny Pickett with that's all went up in smoke where I was hoping these young quarterbacks would pop. I have the first pick via trade. I made the playoffs last year. So every bit of me wants to take Marvin Harrison, but then I'm like, I don't know if my quarterbacks are good enough to pass up Caleb Williams in that situation. So looking at my situation specifically, Jeremy, Superflex League, I have multiple starting quarterbacks. Jordan Love, Will Levis at least for the next year or two, and then Baker Mayfield at least for the next year or two. I'm okay. Is that a situation where I should go grab Marvin Harrison? Because that's certainly what I feel like I should do.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay.
So here's why.
Please disagree with me. Thank you.
So Kenny Pickett's done. Let's be real.
That's drop.
He's not going to start at any point likely in his career. If he is, he's going to be lucky to be Geno Smith at that point later in his career. It just seems like that ship has sailed. Jordan Love, you're probably all right. Seems like you've probably got him for this year, maybe next year. And then Baker Mayfield as a guy that I think we could see fall off, especially with moving on from Dave Canales there. Obviously, he's now in Carolina, which is a big thing. I think that helped him significantly. So did Baker make this giant leap and now all of a sudden Baker's good? Is it going to benefit him that the receivers are there? Like, what's this look like? He could easily fall back to what he has been. It was a career season for him, fantasy-wise, NFL-wise, and I'm not going to bank on that being his career trajectory at this point, So I would personally take Caleb Williams and I would try to move the other guys within the draft. I'd try to move Baker, maybe find someone who believes that this is going to be Baker forever. And if you get good value, who cares? You've got Caleb Williams now. Like, if you move a guy and you can get a fair value, it's not like you need 5 of them. So, you try to maybe move Baker for a second or a late or early second or late first within the draft or something, or maybe a future first or second, and kind of move forward from there. I don't trust Baker Mayfield enough, and I don't trust Jordan Love enough to like say that you're set down the road, So Caleb Williams, you're resetting the clock a little bit. He really does seem like he's going to be solid. You got 3-4 years there, and that's really the window you're looking at in Dynasty. So that'd be my play. I get it. Obviously, if you're like super weak at wide receiver, you could make the argument. But if you won the league, I doubt you are. And the receivers in this class, you can get somebody in the second or late first if you still have your first, and you'll be not Harrison level likely, but a guy that's likely to hit.
So I did weirdest league ever, and I don't want to talk a bunch about my league because nobody cares about your league. But the long and short of it is, I for the first time ever decided to trade back in a startup draft, and people just kept feeding me picks. So I ended up with 6 of the 10 first round picks, and then still ended up with a team that made the playoffs. It just worked out really weird. I picked Justin Jefferson. I actually picked Travis Kelce before people started buying picks off of me. So I had Travis Kelce on a roster that didn't make sense, but then it started to make sense. And now I'm going to end up with Caleb Williams because you said that's who I should take. And I'm going to be able to blame you if it all blows up in my face. So that's how I look at it.
Everybody does it. It's fine.
Exactly.
I'll bear the weight of the misadvice.
I love it. All right, guys. So before we start getting into the actual draft, I had to talk about that 101. Everything you guys are going to say later on in the show is going to be dependent on landing spots. I know we're going to hear landing spot a long time. So I want to get it out of the way right now. With landing spots, I'm not going to ask you guys to predict because it's just too damn hard. We can predict Caleb Williams to Chicago, and that's about it. What I would ask you guys is, if you had 3 wishes, where would you put 3 rookies? 3 just ideal landing spots based on your evaluation of the players. So Jeremy, I'm going to have you get us started with that. Any 3 players, a guy you like for some reason who's not one of the top picks, but any 3 players you want to talk about, give me 3 ideal landing spots for 3 players.
Let me pick really quick just because we're looking here. So maybe Austin, go first. Sorry.
Oh boy,
Austin, he's giving it to you. So now you get to go first.
Okay, I can do this. So I'm going to start. You're going to learn a lot about my podcast listening habits based on this. So my first one, if you listen to any Nate Tice, you'll have heard this take already. But Brock Bowers to the Los Angeles Rams sounds like a really fun option to me. He is basically a power slot, and he can line up wide. Like, he is the ideal candidate to slot in and be essentially a Cooper Kupp replacement. Like, he can play the Cooper Kupp role in that Rams offense. So I'm a huge fan of that happening there. How about we go with Adonai Mitchell to Kansas City? They need a big body guy who can like go and do some contested catches, which Adonai Mitchell, perfect guy to do that. So I'm a huge fan of that option, that wish. And then I'm going to say Drake May to the Patriots.
Ooh.
Sounds like we're just set to like have some funny history happen there. Like, I don't know. Drake May just seems like the type of guy to play for the Patriots. Does he not? Like, that's the type of guy that they like, that pocket presence. And I feel like he could handle having a rough first year and then still work out long term. So there you go. Those are my 3 initial wishes.
Sheerly, for how bad it will upset my buddy Joe Zolo, I would love to see Drake May to the Patriots, because I know he is not a fan of Drake May, and he is a fan of the Patriots, and it's just pure torture for him if that happens. So I'm A-okay with that. So Jeremy, same question. Just 3 guys that you like or hate or whatever reason, that 3 ideal landing spots that you'd love to see him in for fantasy football.
So I will say I'll start with Romo Dunze because I really like Romo Dunze. I'll give you one higher one, and then I'm going to go probably some later guys just because I think that's a little bit more important. But Romo Dunze, I really do want him. A lot of people don't like it, but I think he could be okay with the Giants. I really like that landing spot for him. He's going to come in. He's going to command the volume. He's shown that he can do it in Washington. He's also shown that he can get the job done with a fairly not overly accurate quarterback. Not that Penix is like erratic, but he doesn't always has the best ball placement. He does at times, but he doesn't at times as well. So he's kind of seen that. We've seen that from Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones has put some good film on tape. Like, it's not like Daniel Jones is atrocious. Yes, he struggles mightily at the NFL level, but in the right situation, we've also seen him look pretty solid. And if he does return in a better state, maybe we could say, after the injury, and maybe they can get something going with some playmakers, I think Odunze can command that exterior role for him. He's very Devontae Adams-esque in the way that he can kind of create separation at the catch point without being open, which I think would benefit Daniel Jones a lot. He just fits that a little bit. You know, Jalen Hyatt can be the field stretcher, open up the field some. Wan'Dale Robinson's going to eat up in the middle. Darren Waller's still there. Obviously, the run game, interesting to see, but I think Odunze can command the majority target share in that offense and be the guy to look at. Like, they don't have a red zone guy. You know, yeah, Waller's, but he's going to get on the field. I think Odunze can kind of really eat in that Giants offense that's likely going to be passing enough. So I really want to see that. I think that would be really beneficial for him. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the running backs because I think those are very key. Obviously, the quarterbacks matter, but it's almost like kind of locked up with the quarterback position ish and where they're kind of likely going. But obviously, there's going to be two real prime landing spots for me as far as running backs go. That's obviously Dallas. And honestly, it's going to probably be Las Vegas. I know a lot of people want to crown Zamir White as the guy in that Vegas backfield, but I would beg to differ. I don't think that, yes, he handled it down the road a little bit, but that was a very small stretch. I don't think over 17 games, Zamir White's going to be a sole lone workhorse in that backfield. So for me, what I would really thoroughly enjoy would be saying like a Trey Benson is paired with Zamir White in Vegas. Like, I think that that's a really good combination. Zamir White can kind of be the power guy. Trey Benson can give you the early down stuff. They're kind of similar players, but a little bit of an off-speed pitch. I think that Trey Benson's going to fit that a little bit better, personally. And now it's going to kind of sideline Zamir White a little bit, but they've already got Amir Abdullah and other players that they like to kind of get the ball in the passing game. So I do think that they're going to need to run a little bit with Aiden O'Connell under center. So I think the mixing of Trey Benson and Zamir White give them kind of a 1A, 1B situation. Well, Benson acclimates to the NFL, and then that speed's going to really go ahead and give the Vegas Raiders something that they don't have. Devontae Adams is great. Jacoby Myers is great. But again, not a ton of speed in that offense outside of Trey Tucker. So I think that they could use something like that. And I think him walking in there, that's a good spot for him to kind of command a good target share, as far as not necessarily target share, but an opportunity share, we'll say. And then my next is Braelon Allen to the Dallas Cowboys. I think this running back group is very close together because none of them are an elite type of prospect. Some of these guys are going to require volume. Braelon Allen, you're going to see a lot of hate on Twitter with him at the moment, but if people aren't looking past 2024, that's where you're going to get a lot of that, because 2023, they technically switched their offense to a different style blocking. It was an entire different offense. If you watch him prior to this past season, you'll see where he fits, and that's getting downhill early, kind of being a ground and pound type of player, running in a gap style block, which I think the Cowboys could lend to a little bit, kind of get back to their roots when they had Zeke Elliott there and kind of just pounding the rock and then kind of opening it up. So I really like Braelon Allen there. He's going to go ahead and be able to get that opportunity right away. Now there's some talks about Jalen, I can't think of his names. What? Jonathan Brooks. Geez,
Jonathan Brooks is the big one being.
Jonathan Brooks has kind of been likely pinned to there at the moment, but I think they could go away from him on the basis that I don't know if he'll be ready early in the season, and they need a running back. Like, they have Rico Dowdle. Like, I don't even know if Rico Dowdle's actually rostered, to be honest. It might be.
Is
it Rico Dowdle? Did they sign his contract?
They brought back Rico Dowdle and Malik Davis, so they're running all their backups.
I remember seeing one of them come back. I couldn't remember, but that's the point that I'm making as well. Like, there isn't really anybody there to step in early in the season for Jonathan Brooks. Now, obviously, you could see them bring in, maybe they go that route, they bring in J.K. Dobbins or somebody to try to get them a couple games into the season, but Braelon Allen would be able to step in right away. He's kind of that big-bodied style runner. Yes, he doesn't run totally behind his pads. You'll see say that, but he has a little bit of that Derrick Henry, Najee Harris, where he's a little bit more nimble with his feet, although being a bigger guy. But if he chooses to, he can definitely lower the shoulder and kind of bounce off you. So I think if Allen lands in that situation, it seems right for him, because there's also an opportunity where he doesn't turn into anything because he doesn't get that opportunity in the right scheme, which I think Allen is one of the more scheme-specific runners in this class.
I'm glad you brought up Braelon Allen. I was going to go to the draft. And guys, we will talk about the draft eventually. If you followed this show for any time, you know the draft is for later. But Austin, I was looking at your newly minted rookie rankings that we put on Club Fantasy this morning, and you have Braelon Allen as your RB11. So I just found it interesting that Jeremy likes him, and he did mention, Jeremy, that all these running backs are kind of close together. I don't know if they run 11 deep, Austin. So what are you not seeing from Braelon Allen?
Yeah, so I even took notes on all of the players that I ranked on my side, so that's very helpful for me. What I wrote for him is he's a physical runner, but he's only going to get what is blocked for him, and that's my biggest issue with his skill set. Is I did not see him breaking a ton of tackles. Now I'm going to be the first to admit I don't watch these guys a ton, so I may have just gotten the wrong set of tape.
No,
but from what I saw,
that's the knock on him.
But I didn't feel like he was going to get more than what was bought for him, which I think, that means he's going to be a 3 to 4 yard per carry guy. And I'm not really too excited about that unless he lands in the right spot. So this is where landing spot becomes key. So if he does go to a place like Dallas, then that probably moves him up my board because he's going to be getting more consistent touches. But just at this point in time, there are other running backs that I think are more interesting.
And Josh, who is drafting with us, agrees, has Allen as his RB10. And then I do want to go back and give a little credit. Toilets to Titles actually answered the question. If you're not following them on Twitter, check it out. Toilets to Titles Network. Lad McConkey to Buffalo. And as a Colts fan, Bowers to Indy are his top 2 wishes. He saved the 3rd wish for somebody else. So that's what he's looking for there. The Colts fans obviously hoping to finally get someone who matters at their tight end. And guys, before we look at the draft, I had one last question that was independent of the draft, and it happens to be about tight end. There's been a lot of mixed kind of reviews of Brock Bowers, and I think everybody kind of agrees he's good. But Jeremy, my question with Brock Bowers is he more landing spot dependent than we want to think? Mainly because I'm scared about Kyle Pitts. We saw Kyle Pitts, who looked like he was bulletproof, kind of get hurt by a landing spot. Should we be crossing our fingers for a great landing spot for Brock Bowers, or could he outperform his landing spot, which we hadn't really seen from Kyle Pitts?
100% you should be worried.
Okay.
I wouldn't say like it's a do end all. Like if he lands in a bad spot, am I drafting him at like 310 then? No. But there would be some players who could possibly jump him. Honestly, if he lands with the Colts, I'm not going to rank him as high as other people will. I don't think the Colts is the right situation. We've seen the Shane Steichen offenses, and they don't necessarily integrate the tight end into the passing game as much as you would want. And that's what happened with Kyle Pitts. We've seen it with Dalton Kincaid this past year. Like the Bills didn't use him how we expected him to get used. We saw the opposite with Sam Laporta. Sam Laporta was good because he scored a ton of touchdowns for a tight end. Obviously, he was involved somewhat in the deeper passing game. Now, was he the most talented tight end in that class? I don't think so. Is he good? Yes, but I do think Dalton Kincaid. I think Michael Mayer is a better player in general. But until they get used at the tight end position, it's a huge thing. Look at Jonnu Smith in the past. There was a hype about him. Yeah. There was a hype about Chig Okonkwo. Unless these players are... The tight end position is very landing spot dependent, and I think people overlook that. Why is Travis Kelce? Because he gets fed targets. Why is Mark Andrews? Because he's getting fed targets that matter. Yes, you have good players in these positions, but Dallas Goedert's just as good as those guys, if not close, and he's not as ranked there. Why? Because Philly's not passing to him anymore as much as we would like. So the volume matters at the tight end position. Can the talent eventually become something else? Yes. Like Kyle Pitts this year, I would be a little excited. Offensive change
100%.
Seems 100%. Great. But now what do we do with Pat Freiermuth? Again, a guy that's pretty talented at the tight end position as far as fantasy pass catcher goes. But we saw Arthur Smith bury Kyle Pitts. Is he going to do the same to Pat Freiermuth? It's a very good possibility. So with the tight end position, it's really is a little bit more landing spot dependent. Is he going to fall out of my top 10 or 12? Probably not. But he will definitely probably fall outside my top 7 if he lands in a less than ideal landing spot.
And Austin, I'm just going to have you continue on that thought because we saw Sam Laporta land in Detroit. And I felt like that was we wanted it to be a great landing spot. And we had saw TJ Hawkinson get heavily targeted, but we also saw them completely ignore the tight end after they traded away Hawkinson. So judging these landing spots is a little harder, but focusing on the coach would probably help. Jamie points out, I said landing spot. Kyle Pitts was hurt by bad coaching, as Jeremy pointed out, and that bad coaching could be affecting Freiermuth. I think Jeremy put it best because I wouldn't have thought this, but is there a landing spot, Austin, where Brock Bowers falls out of your first round in this draft, out of your top 10?
Out of my top 10. Wow, that is a great question. Let me just quickly look. Cincinnati, he'd probably fall out. Jacksonville, he might.
Really? I don't think I would hate Cincinnati. Keep going. I'm sorry.
I don't feel like they really. I mean, he's going to have too much competition. I wouldn't love it in Seattle. They do a lot of 3 tight end work. Like, the issue is he's going in a range where there's a lot of guys I'd be nervous about. Now, if he went to Denver, be very interested in that because of the Sean Payton history with a guy like Jimmy Graham. Yeah, and I think that Jamie's point in the chat is just making Jeremy's point for him as well. Like, it really, to me, it matters about the coaching. Is Brock Bowers going to be used correctly? That is the biggest concern I have. It's not about the talent. It's not, because with tight end, like Jeremy was saying, it's less about the surrounding supporting cast, right? With quarterbacks, we care about offensive line. We talk about the receiving talent, etc. With Brock Bowers, it's going to be about the coach. Does the coach want to use the tight end as that weapon? And I think I will probably still bet on him unless the coach is just awful. Like, I'll probably still have him in the first round, mostly because I think the talent is too good. And also, at that part in the draft, the 1-8, 1-9, 110, you are doing pretty well in your league, most likely, unless you traded for that pick. Like, you just won your league. And so betting on a potential generational talent at tight end could be worth it. You're not going to get that many opportunities to get the number 1 tight end in a draft class when you've won your league.
Yeah, I like it. We got Gator Jay saying we should run a second mock. We haven't even talked about this mock yet, Jay. That's what we are getting to right now. So it's finally time, halfway through the show. Let's talk specifically about this mock. I'm going to run down the first 2 rounds, ask you guys a couple of questions here. So Marvin Harrison goes 101. To Toilet's credit, Toilets, that was an auto pick. He didn't make it in time for the draft. He would have taken Caleb Williams, and then a lot of questions get asked by Big Game James about who would have went at 2. So we're going to talk a little bit about that here in a second. But Harrison at 1, Caleb Williams at 2, Malik Neighbors at 3, Drake May at 4, Jaden Daniels at 5, Roma Dunze at 6 to Jeremy, JJ McCarthy at 7, Brock Bowers at 8, Brian Thomas at 9, and AD Mitchell at 10 to Austin. No real surprises with all the quarterbacks there. Then we start the second round with speed, Xavier Worthy. I think this was actually an auto pick as well. Lad McConkey at 2. Troy Franklin at 3, Jalen Wright at 4, Jonathan Brooks at 5, Braelon Allen at 6, Keon Coleman at 7, Michael Penix at 8, Roman Wilson at 9, and Marshawn Lloyd at 10. And I want to actually start with the first question that was brought up in our chat, because this doesn't happen very often, where someone has a question that is literally on my show sheet. And these guys don't get my show sheet. But Jamie brings up, and I think you're a good person to ask this to, Jeremy. Is Neighbors that far behind Marvin Harrison Jr.? Because it started off this draft discussion about Marvin Harrison being a generational talent, just generational. And I keep hearing more and more, we could see Malik Neighbors go over Marvin Harrison in the actual draft. And he goes 3rd in this draft ahead of all of the other quarterbacks. My question to you is doubly so. Is Harrison that much better than Malik Neighbors as we were initially led to believe? And should Neighbors be going against all of the tier 2 quarterbacks, going ahead of them?
First question, yes, Harrison is much better than Malik Neighbors.
Okay.
Second question, no. So I actually have Odunze over Neighbors. It's nothing against Neighbors, but I think these 3 are a lot closer than people give them credit. I think Odunze's tape isn't as electric. So if you turn it on and you watch, or even if you search for like Odunze highlights, like, they don't look great. Malik Neighbors look much better. I'll tell you that. I'll give you that. Neighbors is an electric player. Now, he wasn't an offense that allowed him a lot of free releases. It was an offense that allowed him to kind of work within wide open spaces, and he has really good spatial awareness. And once the ball's in his hands, he's the best receiver in this class. I will give him that. Now, I just think that Marvin Harrison, the respect was given by defensive coordinators. We saw it from Reception Perception, who I believe he said he was the highest double or triple covered. I'm not 100% with that. Maybe you guys can correct it there. Receiver he's charted at a collegiate level. That tells you everything you need to know right there. I don't care what the tape looks like. Most of us probably, if you're watching it, don't fully understand what you're watching. Like, it's the facts, and I'll make mistakes all the time. Like, unless you know what that defensive coverage is supposed to be, how are you necessarily grading that? You're just watching, oh, he was open or he wasn't open, and it's a learning curve. And I'm not saying anybody is wrong. I'm just saying that it takes time to develop these skills. There's a reason there's pros, and there's a reason that the defensive coordinators were double and triple covering Marvin Harrison, because the respect was earned. They know how good he is. They know what he can do. So, not that Neighbors can't do that. I just think that Malik Neighbors is a little bit more dependent on a scheme than Marvin Harrison will be. I think Harrison can kind of just go in and fit into any offense. They're going to feed him the ball. He's going to be that perimeter guy. Neighbors, I think he'll be all right. I'm not saying that he isn't. I'm a little bit more worried about Neighbors than I am Harrison making the transition as far as being this like elite tier guy. I think Neighbors is a safe prospect. I think he's going to be good. I just don't know if Neighbors is Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, where I think Marvin Harrison can be. I think Neighbors is more of like, what's that next tier? Like a T. Higgins area.
Oh,
Like
okay.
you know what I mean? Like, I think he's good. I do think he can be solid. I just don't know if he lives up to the hype, personally. I could be wrong. I've been wrong. I can tell you that. 100%.
I mean, we can all,
I'm wrong all
we
the
can all
time.
be wrong, but I do
But
want to give you
I
your
just
flowers
think-
from the chat. Josh is very happy. I think that was more about you having a Dunze over Neighbors, because I think it's not something we're hearing a lot. And Jeremy actually agrees with not going necessarily Marvin Harrison. He would have went Neighbors with the 2 pick, which is why I was asking that question to begin with. So I think just hearing the differing point of views is definitely a good thing here, but we can all be wrong. Let's be perfectly clear. Austin, wide receiver is one of the positions we agree with. When I looked at our rankings on the Club Fantasy site, we have 1 through 4 as the exact same: Marvin Harrison, Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze, and then Brian Thomas coming in. Do you agree these top 3 guys are just that step ahead and maybe a lot closer than people are giving credit for?
I think, yes, the top 3 are a step ahead. Like, there's a clear tier break between Odunze and Brian Thomas to me. I almost put Marvin Harrison in a tier by himself because, frankly, Ryan, remind me, are you an Ohio State person?
I barely follow college football at all anymore, but if I'm rooting for a team, I'm rooting for Ohio State because I was born and raised in Ohio.
Okay, so you might not be allowed to answer this question. Who was Marvin Harrison's quarterback this year?
Oh, I literally don't have any idea. Oh, it's some kid who transferred. He was like being a super bitch
Some
about it
kid.
at the end of the season.
That's the point, right? You just made the point. Some kid. He still produced so well because to me, it doesn't matter. I think the Marvin Harrison thing, like, we've known he was going to be the best receiver in this class for 3 years. And so people are bored. So we got to come up with a new story. Yeah. Maybe Neighbors is ahead of him. And that's kind of what my take on what's happening with the Marvin Harrison discussion right now. But then after that, I think Malik Neighbors and Odunze are pretty close, but I still have Neighbors above Odunze. But I definitely think, like, if you are looking for an elite receiver, you need one of those 3 guys, and then there's going to be a little bit of a downgrade until you get to that Brian Thomas, Adonai Mitchell tier.
No, I like it. Looking at the running backs, Jeremy, I was glad you brought them up for some of your landing spots. I was not sure where running backs were going to go in this draft, and we had 4 go of the 10 picks in the second round. I'm not going to call it a run, though. We did have 3 consecutive running backs go, with you bringing up the tail end with Braelon Allen, Jalen Wright, Jonathan Brooks, Marshawn Lloyd goes to Austin at the 10th pick. And then we had 2 picks immediately go in the 3rd round, which if this were a 12 team, that would have all been in the 2nd round. So my question is, Jeremy, is the 2nd round where we should value the bulk of these running backs? Are people starting to reach on some of these backs because it seems weird letting them all fall, or is the 2nd round appropriate?
I don't hate the 2nd round. I think that one's going to sneak into the back half. I think some of these receivers aren't going to get the ideal landing spots we want. I think some of them slide a little bit. Someone's going to land in Dallas. Someone's probably going to land in Vegas. Someone's going to land in Carolina or the Chargers, and like we're going to push them up into that tier. So right at the tip of the corner there, I like going to the running backs a little bit. I think that one of these or 2 of these guys will be valuable fantasy assets. Are they top 12 guys? Probably not. But, top 24 seems right for some of these guys. So the 2nd round, I would start taking some dart throws. I just think you're in a tier after Troy Franklin here. You're in a tier of kind of like a lot of question marks around these receivers. Yes, they've shown some talent on tape and stuff like that, but there's been some production issues. There's some metrics that don't go in their favor. So like you're kind of in a mixed bag of like what's your poison, you know? The running back position is definitely viable in fantasy, and I think they're going to slip a little bit in the NFL draft, but that could give us some good kind of 1A, 1B combinations. And I really think that at least the order that they went feels about right. So I like where they're at, you know, as far as this group of the guys that went in the second round feel right. You know what I mean? Probably not the exact order I would have went, but like, those are the guys.
No, and I think that's a really fair assessment. So Austin, continuing on what Jeremy said there, does the guy Dallas drafts belong in the first round? And let's stick with the 10-team feature here. I brought up the 12-team just because these guys would all have went in the second round in that. But in a 10-team league, looking at the guys who went, where it is the solid wide receivers, and then it's your quarterbacks and Brock Bowers, does a running back fit in the first round there if it's the guy who ends up in Dallas, Austin?
In a 10-team league, I think probably not. I have all 5 receivers that went in the first round ahead of my first running back, which is actually Marshawn Lloyd. Marshawn Lloyd is the only running back I have in the top 12 of my Superflex rankings. So he's the only one I think is like a first round no-brainer. But if you're on that turn, like you're having to reach a little bit. So there may be another running back that I have at the top end of the second round you could go for. So like I think who did I have up there? Jalen Wright is a potential option for me that I like there. And I'm not sold on like, just definitely go for what is happening in Dallas, because I think they are still like, they're wanting to pass the ball more. And, you know, we had this narrative going into last year that Mike McCarthy wanted to ground and pound, and it kind of wasn't true, which some of that's because of the personnel. Like Tony Pollard's not really that style. But I think they're going to be more balanced than we anticipate from a Dallas Cowboys offense.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Let's take a quick look at the next 2 rounds. So Bo Nix, Blake Corum, Trey Benson, Ricky Pearsall, Audric Estime, Xavier Leggett. Man, I'm going to start getting names wrong here. Polk. Is it Jalen? Jalen Polk.
Jalen. I don't know if it's Jalen or Jalen. I'm not 100% sure how it's pronounced.
Bucky Irving. I think it's Javon Baker, Malachi Corley, Will Shipley, Jatavian Sanders, Spencer Rattler, Malik Washington, Devontae Walker. I don't know McMillan. Who is Jalen McMillan? Brendan Rice, Ray Davis, Frank Gore, and Johnny Wilson. I love to go negative on this show, Jeremy. Is there anybody who went in these 2 rounds that you do not think should have went, and would you have taken your 5th round pick or any of these other 5th round picks over these guys? Is there just a glaring person who you don't believe belongs in the 3rd and 4th round of this specific draft?
I'd say Frank Gore's a little early.
Okay.
Not super early, a little early. Obviously, the landing spot will matter. But Frank Gore's probably a guy I'm not drafting, likely. So that seems a little out of place for me. Outside of that, maybe Spencer Rattler, but you're also in a
super flex.
I mean, let's be honest. Come on, we tried this with Sam Howell as a late guy. Like it doesn't work. Like if they're not drafted early in the NFL draft, your chances of them hitting is where Rattler's going to go. It's not going to be. I think he's a viable quarterback. But even this late, I'm like, what am I going to do with him? Like Austin said earlier, like what? I'm gonna pass up, say, Malik Washington, who could turn out to be a premier receiver, a top 36 guy for a backup quarterback on my bench. Like,
interesting.
Do you know what I mean? Like once it's this late,
it makes a lot of sense.
I don't really lean to the quarterbacks as much in Superflex as other people do. Like I just like, are they worth it? Sure. If we've expended everybody that I think has any potential, sure, I'll take a shot. But there's a lot of guys here late. I tend to lean to running backs as opposed to other positions. So for me, I just think it's early. It's just my personal take is I think it's early for Spencer Rattler. So outside that, I like.
You mentioned you leaned running backs. The chat is just loving the running back value they're seeing in this draft. And I got to be honest, as someone who always ends up with a lot of 3rd round picks, I am also loving the running back value that we're seeing in this draft, Austin. But yeah, same question, Austin. I love making you guys go negative. Anybody in these rounds 3 and 4 that you're just a little shocked even went drafted and certainly should not have went before the last pick of the draft?
Yeah, I think for me, Brendan Rice is actually the one that sticks out to me.
It seems like these NFL players' kids are getting overdrafted right now. Is the story? So
yeah, it's like a familiar name. It's like, oh, surely they're good. Marvin Harrison's good, and I'm like, well, I don't know. So I have Brendan Rice ranked 56th in my Superflex rankings, and my big thing is just like I don't feel like he has a ton of creativity on routes, and the way he gets off the line, he does a lot of fancy footwork. He's kind of like if DeAndre Swift were to play wide receiver, he just like does a bunch of like quick movements and then doesn't get open. And so I'm not really a huge fan of that. He obviously like had some production because Caleb Williams was throwing him the ball. And so, if the landing spot works out, maybe he moves up my board, but I probably won't be drafting him.
No, I think that's fair. And then looking at these later rounds, Jeremy, you kind of already mentioned some names. I kind of quickly did the count, and I think it was 10 wide receivers who went in the first 2 rounds, or at least it's very close. So looking at rounds 3 through 5, which wide receiver here, because wide receivers are the ones that can kind of come up and shock people, which wide receiver here could end up surprising people as a value this late in the draft?
There's a lot. So I'm going to give you 3 names because these are the, well, actually I'll give you 4 because these are like the 4
My goodness.
in on.
You love the value.
I really like Jalen McMillan. I think that he's getting overshadowed. He had an injury this past year, which really allowed Jalen Polk to step into play. I think McMillan might be a little limited to kind of an interior guy at the NFL level, but he's very good. He runs really good routes. He can create after the catch. He can be used in the run game a little bit. I'm not saying he's like Puka Nacua, but like he's kind of that mold of like a guy that's getting a little dismissed, but like there's some talent there. So I really like him this late. I think he could become somebody pretty solid. Jacob Cowing is a guy that I think is really getting diminished a lot. A super hyper productive guy at Arizona. Yes, he's undersized, but we've seen these undersized guys come in and kind of have some viable production. The issue with Cowing is he can go one of 2 ways. He's either going to be like Tank Dell and we're going to like see some immediate production, or he's going to be like Isaiah McKenzie and he's going to give you 1 or 2 good weeks and be a punt returner. So where he's going, the 5th round, a little late. I think maybe he could go over some of these other guys, but definitely a guy I'm keying in on. Jamari Thrash and then Jermaine Burton, those 2 right there as well. That row of the 5th round, I think those guys have some upside. Good route runners. Jermaine Burton is a guy that is just a high recruit, very athletic type of player. Poor production throughout his whole collegiate career. So a guy I'm worth betting on this late. So that's probably where I'm at with those guys.
I like it. So Jeremy gave us 4, Austin. Do you concur with any of his, or do you have a guy of your own, that 3rd round or later wide receiver who could just end up being an insane value?
Those are all guys I'm down with. I was looking at my list and I came up with 2, but then I realized I drafted them, so I'm not going to talk about them yet.
So the guys that Austin took, Malachi Corley and Johnny Wilson. So,
but one that came up in the chat that I want to highlight. I also am interested in Malik Washington.
Yeah,
you're not going to like him, Ryan, because he's small, but he doesn't play small. He plays physical, which I like. He can take the top off. He can execute underneath routes. He's good after the catch. And he's good at helping his quarterback whenever the play breaks down. So he's good in that kind of scramble drill. I like that. The other guy, just outside of my top 10, is Jalen Polk that we just mentioned. He can get downfield. Sometimes he's slow to generate routes, which can disrupt the play timing. But I like him as a guy that could sneak up into the back end of the 2nd round.
Perfect. Shout out to Toilets to Titles for doing my job better than me. I'm supposed to be yelling at you guys to hit that subscribe button, and I've had so much fun talking to these 2 that I have forgot to do it. I see a bunch of you guys are watching on Twitter. It's like 2 clicks. Click the video, and then it'll drag you over to our YouTube page. Do that. We need to get these subscribers up. Our goal is this. I'm supposed to have 800 by the end of the day, or I'm going to get yelled at. We may be there as far as I know, but go ahead and get us to 800 by the end of the day so Josh doesn't yell at me. We want to hit 1,000 by the start of the season so we can like maybe start getting paid off of this shit and like give money to the people who create all this great content. It would be awesome. So look, it's not that hard. Hit subscribe. As Toilets pointed out, he thought he was already subscribed and they weren't. Be better. Be best. Do what they say there. I'm about
According
to have
my records, we're at $7.99. So literally,
so
if just one of you subscribe, you will save Ryan from being yelled at.
Yeah, it's not that hard. All right, before I have these guys break, there you go. Jeremy's going to do it on the show. Before I have these guys break it down, I want to draw everyone's attention. I love the color coding. And I want you guys to notice the color coding, because for a Superflex, I think there's not enough pink. Jeremy disagrees. We're going to talk a little bit more about that as we wrap up the show. But I am shocked that only 3 tight ends went in this entire draft. And I'm not shocked because I think it's the wrong idea. I'm shocked because it's the first draft all year where you guys have not loaded up on tight ends to end the draft. So congratulations. As Jeremy pointed out, get the running backs, get the wide receivers. Do not load up necessarily on these tight ends. But man, does it make my keep trade cut a really, really stupid and boring question. So my keep trade cut, Austin, was I was looking at your rankings and kind of looking for players that stand out to me. And I noticed that you have, I think it's Cade Stover as your tight end 2. And I think that's the highest I've seen him on anybody's list. I'm big on Jatavian Sanders, who did go in this draft, and I love Theo Johnson, who did not go in this draft. So my keep trade cut today was going to be, and I was going to preface this to make it real torturous for you, Austin. You have to start whichever one of these guys you keep for the entire season. They are the second tight end in this draft. You have Theo Johnson, Jatavian Sanders, and obviously you have Cade Stover as your tight end 2. Keep, trade, cut, Theo Johnson, Jatavian Sanders, Cade Stover. Austin.
Okay, I got this. Here's the funny thing about this, though. I'll just say, to continue our ongoing bit on the keep, trade, cut segment. Today I was like, oh, you know what? Ryan's not going to know what keep, trade, cut to make good, because we haven't talked rookies yet. And then I realized, oh shit, I sent him my rankings. So
you did. And so
keep, trade, cut. So Cade Stover, I am keeping because I think that he primarily makes his impact in the pass game, which is what you need to have that year 1 impact. So I would feel best about having him in my lineup. He lines up everywhere, including outside. He is a pretty good route runner, and he's hard to tackle. So I like that in a tight end. I will trade Jatavian Sanders. Landing spot's going to play a huge role. He's more of a traditional tight end. He's effective in the pass game, but he's the most popular tight end outside of Brock Bowers. So there's probably some trade value there. And then I'll cut Theo Johnson. I feel like he makes his presence known more in the run game than the pass game. He does line up everywhere, which is nice, but I think he's going to be even more that traditional tight end that plays that run pass game, and instead of just being like a Sam Laporta type, like I think Cade Stover has the opportunity to be.
Yeah. Jeremy, normally these questions are way more interesting, but I'm still learning the rookies, and I did not expect no tight ends to go in this draft whatsoever. So these were the 3 I expected to come up, and I wanted to use Cade Stover because Austin had him as his tight end 2. I did not expect Theo to not even get drafted, Stover to not get drafted, and Sanders being one of 3. So pardon the mildly boring question, but keep, trade, cut, Theo Johnson, Jatavian Sanders, Cade Stover, with the caveat that with whoever you keep, you have to start at tight end this entire season.
Oh, you're fine. I love a good tight end conversation on Saturday morning. I'm going to keep Jatavian Sanders. Although I respect Cade Stover, we have seen this with the Ohio State tight ends. Just most recently, Jeremy Ruckert. They kind of end up getting buried because they're usually traditionally a little bit better blockers than they are in the pass game. Yes, Cade Stover can kind of do it all. Very good, well-purposed type of tight end. At the best, I think you're hoping he's Jake Ferguson, to be honest. Is just going to have to leave off the volume. And I don't know if he will get the draft capital or the location to really be totally viable. Yeah. I think he will get drafted. He probably will go a little earlier than some of these other guys just because he is pretty well-rounded and has that ability in the pass game. So I'll probably just cut him just because I don't totally agree with the high-end fantasy ceiling that Austin has. And then Theo Johnson would probably be my trade. I think there's a lot of people who like Theo Johnson better than I do. So I'd probably just trade him. So I think Sanders has the most upside of that group. So I'm going to go with him. I'll start him. I think he ends up in a decent situation. Hopefully gets the ball in his hands and can kind of create out of the outlets, shorten the game in the field. He can stretch the field, but he's not like the best field stretcher by any means.
Perfect. Jeremy, at the end of the show, I usually just have you guys recap your draft. You've talked about a lot of your players already. You don't have to talk about everybody again. You haven't really talked about Leggett at all or Thrash. So if you want to kind of focus on those 2, but you went a Dunze in 1, Braelon Allen in 2, Leggett, McMillan, and Thrash. You went 4 wide receivers, running back. Did you just take the value as it fell to you? You weren't really pressed about getting a quarterback in the Superflex?
Yeah, I don't ever press positional value in drafts. I just don't. You can always trade for position if you have to. And again, once you pass the first round of quarterbacks, for me, I'm pretty out. Unless it's a guy like last year, I was in on Will Levis at the beginning of the second, just because he had decent draft capital in the second, kind of had a good spot with Tennessee. Like, okay. But I'm less in on Michael Penix and Bo Nix this year. So for me, I'm going to take that value. I have Odunze, like I mentioned earlier in the show, as my second receiver. So this was no brainer for me. I would take him over. Probably where he's at. That's about where I have him valued. Maybe a little bit earlier because I'd probably have neighbors after him.
I was just gonna say,
some in this range here, but 1.6 is about where he's probably going to be. So it's on point for value. Braelon Allen is my running back, one of a group of four. So they're all one. They could also all be two. They could also all be three and all be four. Depends where they land. As of right now, he is listed first. I'm going to say maybe alphabetical order is why. But that's just where I'm at right now until these guys get some landing spots. Running backs are hard to dissect. I think it's good value here. We talked about it earlier. Leggett, at the point in the draft in the third round, I'll bank on the late breakout. I think he's going to get drafted in a good situation. He's obviously shown that he can be viable once the ball's in his hands. I think he has a lot to do to become a polished receiver, but where he's at, I'm willing to take the shot here just because we've seen kind of a high upside from him. Jamari Thrash, again, I talked about him a little bit there as far as like a late round guy I'm keen to get on. He's a very good route runner. I think he can create a little bit after the catch. His big issue is kind of drops. Wasn't overly productive, but it was a Louisville offense that was less than stellar. So I like him. I think he could kind of be a sneaky player that becomes something viable for fantasy down the road in the right spot. But again, at this point, this is what it looks like. I'd probably go some running backs once we have some landing spots.
There you go.
Because I said I tend to lean that way, but it was tough to avoid this value because I really like these group of receivers in the second half in McMillan and Thrash. So it was hard to avoid that value.
And Austin, you took a very similar draft strategy from 4 picks later. You took the value as it came. You did not press the quarterback position. I find it interesting. Jeremy has Braelon Allen as his one. You have Marshawn Lloyd as your RB1. You were both able to land them late in the second round, but you also like your late wide receivers.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of value at the running back position with both of my guys. So Marshawn Lloyd, the reason I really like him, I'm a sucker for running backs that are patient runners. They let the gap open for them, and then they hit the seam really quickly. And that's what Marshawn Lloyd was specialized at. He really just lets his blockers do the work for him, and then has the burst to get through those tackles. So I really enjoyed watching his tape. My 2 receivers, I want to start actually with Johnny Wilson, who I got in the 4th round. I like him. He's kind of got a tight end body.
I like him too. 6'7". Yes, please. All day, every day.
6'7".
He's Tuesday Flowers.
I thought you might like him. But I'm a big fan. I think he's a really interesting candidate to develop into a power slot, similar to that role that we've seen Cooper Kupp fill out. No, I'm not saying he's going to be Cooper Kupp. I'm just saying like
he's not.
When I say a power slot, I mean like what Cooper Kupp is. So I like that as a potential avenue for him. He's a good route runner, and just he's a big target for his quarterback. So that's good. And Malachi Corley, I took in the 3rd round. He had a tough situation. If you watch Western Kentucky, not good. Not a good situation. Not a good offensive line, not a great quarterback. So he was doing the best he could. I liked his route running ability. I could see he was getting open, just the ball wasn't going his direction. And then the guy that I'm going to start talking about a lot, I love Rasheen Ali. Here's the thing. He's a lot of injury risk. So he's my RB4 in my rankings. He has incredible speed, really great burst, but he has struggled with injuries. He's missed a couple of seasons, like almost all of a couple of seasons due to injuries. He didn't participate in the combine. He didn't participate in the Senior Bowl, all because of injury. So you're taking some risk with him, but if he can land in a place that has some good physical therapists and whatnot, some good training staff, I like him as a late round dart throw.
There we go. Guys, that wraps up the draft. There is one thing I wanted to point out, and this is where I don't normally disagree with our guest, like ever. But one thing I try to learn from Superflex is the cheapest you're ever going to get quarterbacks is at the draft. So while I agree with Jeremy, don't waste early picks on bad quarterbacks. I think a lot of the late picks could be wasted on potentially bad quarterbacks. So when you look at the color coding of this draft, only, what is it, seven quarterbacks go in the entire draft. And if I'm taking late round flyers in a super flex, I'm going quarterback. So I'm going to call that the oops of the draft. It's probably a small oops, but I just think I would have went quarterback a little bit more, even if Jeremy disagrees with me. I'm sorry, man. I just, like I said, I like to land them when I can.
That's what allows us to play the game. If we all had the same opinions, it'd be pretty boring trying to draft the same people. So
in the chat, Josh brings up Michael Pratt was a guy that maybe in a late round pick could have been a guy that could potentially do something. And Josh points out by yelling at everybody, got us to 800 subs, so I don't have to get yelled at by Josh and Gator J. So
that may or may not have been me.
Hey, if it is, I'm happy. But in all seriousness, we appreciate
I did
it. Especially a show like this. It's very boring if we don't have participation. So we here at Club Fantasy appreciate each and every one of you. We go live like 5 times a week now, so we very much appreciate it. I'll break down the schedule for you guys here in a minute. We are going to get out of here. First and foremost, thank you to Jeremy, our guest. Remind everybody where they can find your work, what you're working on, all that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me, first of all. And I agree. Yeah. You should subscribe. You guys have a great show. All of the shows. I've been on, I think, a couple of them. So,
and you're going to be on more as the weeks come.
I enjoy them, so I agree. I think they should check them out. But yeah, you can find all my stuff at Popes FFH. That's the X account. That's probably the easiest way. I post links to everything, so you can always go ahead and go from there. But if you want to, you can head on over to FTNFantasy.com. That's where all the written work, rankings, stuff is. And then there's also the FTN Dynasty podcast as well, which, you know, Ryan, like you alluded to a little bit earlier, you just got to listen to me most times. It's just me talking to a microphone, but you know,
hey, you know,
if you want to listen to it,
I'm not so much
nice monotone way to go to bed.
Hey, it counts
as a listen, you know.
So to let you guys know behind the scenes what he's talking about, I said I didn't want to have my big ass face on the screen when we start the show because I think that's turning people off. Jeremy, listening to you for a whole show, getting good information works. You don't want to see this for an hour straight.
Well,
so that's why
you don't want to see mine either. That's why I don't go live.
There you go. Exactly.
Mine's pre-recorded, so nobody has to see just my giant face.
We're all aware of our flaws. My wife loved it. I was telling her I'm changing my intro earlier, and I was like, nobody wants to see literally half the screen being my forehead. I understand. I'm an old man.
Trust me.
Exactly.
Look at this thing.
Exactly.
It's hidden. That's why we wear hats, all right?
Exactly. Not me. I put it out there for the world. You can project rankings on my forehead. Austin, what do you got going on right now, buddy?
Yeah. So first off, you can follow me on Twitter/X and Instagram at Austin_FFL. My rookie rankings are now on the website clubfantasyffl.com.
Live this morning.
Yes. And you can follow me for all sorts of Carolina Panthers goodness at Last Word on NFL.
There you go. So make sure you're following these guys for that great information. Let me break down for you that busy Club Fantasy schedule. We have 2 mock drafts every week. The show is every Saturday, and Jay goes on live with Chris every Monday, though Chris, I don't think, is making it this week because Austin is the guest host as they jump into a best ball draft with our good friend Rum Boys Robbie. So make sure you guys are paying attention to that show. I think Robbie is with Underdog now, so that's just a perfect best ball show. It's going to be Austin, Jay, and Robbie Monday night at 10 p.m. Eastern. Every Wednesday we go live. We are in the middle of our Stars of Tomorrow series. We are going to be talking wide receivers this week with John Lobb. We go live at 7 o'clock, so make sure you're paying attention to that one. It's going to be an excellent episode. We break down all of the rookies. We talk a little bit about landing spots, what differentiates some from the others, and clearly the rookies are a big topic. If you're just into Dynasty, every Sunday, Joel and Michael Sicoli, Joel Worth and Michael Sicoli go live for the Dynasty after party, and we even have golf every Wednesday morning. You're going to find Who's Your Caddy. That's Kelly and Adam breaking down golf DFS for you. Basically, Club Fantasy has you covered. So just go ahead and hit that subscribe button. We'd very much appreciate it. That's the end of the show, guys. Always remember, defense wins championship, offense wins fantasy football, and practice makes perfect. We will see you at the next mock draft.